special welcome for those members who've joined the committee for evidence today, and that's Mr. Rook and Mr. Winspear. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us this afternoon. We will just take a few apologies for absence first, and we'll officially start the meeting. We've received apologies, I understand it, from Councillor Cheryl Philpott, Councillor Michael Locke, and Councillor Wendy Fitzgerald. Okay, so has anybody got a disclosures of personal prejudicial interest that would like to give us for the meeting?
I don't think
No?
so.
Okay. And just to remind the political members that are here, in terms of the councillors, there's a prohibition on what's called whipped votes. Okay, so just to note that. And we also have somebody else that has joined us, and that's Jamie as well. You've joined us from Penland FC.
How's it going?
Okay. Hi there. Thank you for joining us as well. So we're just going to quickly look at the minutes for the last meeting, and if anybody can propose those as a true and accurate record, that would be good. Thank you. So we've got proposed and seconded, which is great. And then we haven't received any public questions for public question time. So if we move now on to the stakeholder consultation, I'll just give you a bit of an overview of who's joining us today, and also maybe then we can go through the list of when people will speak. So from Coed Gwilym Park, today we have Mr. Rook, who's joined us. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Rook. We are also looking at evidence from Mumbles Skate Park, but we've had apologies from Mr. Bynon, who's unable to make this meeting, but we'll be making a meeting on the 23rd of July. We have Jamie, who I think is joining us from Penland AFC. Thanks for coming as well. Mr. Winspear is joining us from the Swansea Council for Volunteering Service, or Voluntary Service. We also invited Swansea Tennis Centre, but we haven't had any details from them. Underhill Park, Mr. Pobleski, he has given us a written submission, and we'll be able to go through that later. It's in some detail. We also had a written submission at the last meeting, which we can touch on today, from Clanridian Higher Community Council. So what we were hoping to do with each of the submissions and each of the people who've joined us today is just to get them to highlight some of the key learning points or key improvements that they foresee that we could take forward as a part of this inquiry. And all of the members here have seen or read the written submissions that have come in, and thank you for those. But I think if we could start maybe with Mr. Rook from Coed Gwilym.
Yep.
If I can just ask you, Mr. Rook, thank you for joining us. Is there anything that you feel that we should really take away from the process, or a good learning point that you think that we could improve on going forward as a council?
Oh, I've got it all written down here. You're going to get a chapter and verse now.
Yeah.
In the same format as you did with the others. What went well and etc. So
yeah, brilliant. Yeah. If you want to start with those, so the main question, as you mentioned, the first one is what went well.
Yeah.
Is there anything that, in addition, you wanted to tell us about in that area?
Okay. The Friends of Coed Gwilym Park is a registered charity that was set up in March 2019. All 8 formal park groups are represented, which at that time was 3 football clubs, 3 bowls clubs, a heritage centre, and the canal centre. The team was established to improve all of the facilities in the park for the community. The initial funding we received was 37,000 to upgrade an old pavilion, and we had that funding from Munadaguire Wind Farm. We then had grants of 89,000 from the lottery, 6,885 from the Coalfields Trust, the Economic Recovery Fund through the local authority of 131,000, a further grant from Munadaguire of 35,000, Community Facilities Programme of the Welsh Government 40,528, and the Landfill Tax LDTCS we had 45,000, plus 15,000 from Valet Europe, a large local company, giving a total of 362,998. These funds were used to build a community pavilion in the park, which started operating in March 2023 and has been hugely successful since its opening. We secured a grant of 13,000 for solar panels under the Rural Anchor Scheme, and these panels have been put on the original football pavilion in the park. We also secured 13,000 from Keep Wales Tidy and have formed a community garden in the park. We've just completed a new girls' changing room, which is funded with 300,000 from the Football Association of Wales, 80,000 from Swansea Local Authority, and the footballers raised 55,000 themselves, giving a total of 435,000. Well, that building is now up and running. We also had various funds for a new external changing room, monies from the Swansea Bay Foundation and the Community Facilities Programme. We've had other grants for warm spaces, coast funding for afternoon teas for our senior citizens. Local businesses have funded the co-op, and we've had several individual donations. So overall, we've put 1 million back into the park in a relatively short space of time, 2 years. Plus, the local authority has spent in the region of 200,000 by improving our local play area in the park, and 120,000 in an adjacent area to the park, which is the canal towpath. And we hope to run a park run there perhaps later this year. And they've just recently spent, through the local authority, 30,000 on painting the surfaces of the 2 tennis courts within the park. So that's what we've done. What we're planning to do in the next while is we put in a grant for a new community minibus and community car, which is to be used for taking local people to hospital visits with the community car. The minibus would be used by all the clubs in the park, as well as the men's shed, the over 50s, the old age, etc. We've been granted 30,000 of the overall funding of 126, but we're waiting to hear from the lottery for 96,000, and we're pretty hopeful that we will get that. Moving on, our plans going forward are for a 3G pitch, relocate the tennis courts in the Mugger for additional parking, because we have been a victim of our own success by needing more parking. Tarmac the main drive in the car park, new lighting, an estimated cost of 750,000, hopefully of which 500,000 will be given by the or granted by the Football Association of Wales, and hopefully our local authority and some others will come up with the balance. Currently, we're funding for planning to get this project off the ground. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the park run issues. There's some issues with the towpath, but we're trying to sort that out locally and nationally. As far as the help we had getting to this stage, Lewis Hines, who was no longer with the local authority, was extremely helpful. He was the asset manager transfer guy. Gemma Bevan, who's a community initiative coordinator, wonderful. Sally Ann Rees, our local area coordinator, excellent. And of course, Swansea Council for Voluntary Services, can't fault them. They helped us with many of the grants and continue to help us with many of the grants. And I have to say, our esteemed leader, Rob Stewart, was very helpful when we needed him. So that's that section. I go on to the challenges, or do you want me to, anybody want to ask a question on that? No.
Thank you, Mr. Hawke. I mean, that's an exceptional list of funding that you've been able to ascertain and to pull together, and I mean, you should be proud of that. Unless any of members have any questions at this stage, if you can go on to what you found most challenging, that would be really useful.
Yeah, okay. Right. One of the big challenges was getting different authority departments to speak to each other. What we found initially was cultural services received an income from the park because they took the revenue at that time, although it's stopped now, from letting out the football pitches and the facilities. Whereas the Parks Department were quite happy for us to have the lease because they would be saving money, or the £15,000 or whatever it cost them to cut the grass and do the other maintenance items. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, so that was a challenge, because we, one department was for it and one was against it from a financial point of view. We had some issues dealing with Clydach County Council, whom we didn't realise initially were trying to take over the whole Clydach Community Council, who were trying to take over the whole park. But in the end, they pulled out of it for a variety of reasons. And I mean, we were quite happy for them to do it, but it didn't happen. And we didn't take over the whole park. Since being formed, we've taken 2 leases, one in 2022 and a further one last December in 2023. And we hope to take other leases for other areas that we would develop with 3G pitches and things, but there's a bit of negotiating to be done there before we get to that. Dealing with the authority's legal department, who seemed very short-staffed. It took an awful long time, and so much so that we may have lost grants through that process had we not pushed. And this is why we contacted people at the top of the local authority to help us say, we don't get this soon, we're going to lose out on funding. So those are really the key challenges.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hawke. Is there anything that you think that we should take as a learning point as a local authority from those key challenges? What would you like to see improve? You talked about communication.
At the end, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
okay.
No problem. Has anybody got any questions for Mr. Hawke at this stage, or should we go on to the next question or next area? Okay, I think if you can take us through the risks and barriers, that would be great.
Risks and barriers are not securing the funding. We were determined as a group we would get lottery funding, and we got it. It took us 3 attempts, but we got it. And bear in mind that we were trying to get it in the middle of COVID, which was not particularly easy to meet up and what have you. Other funding then followed. It tends to be the process that once you get somebody on board, other people are far keener to come forward and feel more secure and comfortable with giving you additional funding. But it wasn't helped by the slowness of the authority to provide the leach, which was critical. COVID was very much an issue, as we could not physically engage with our community and obtain the face-to-face surveys and other feedback, etc., that they were looking for in some of the grant applications. So we had to do survey monkeys and various different other things to try and get the information, letters of support and all these from all local organizations. Financial support, a lot of local businesses gave us some monies and things. So we did get there, but it wasn't easy. We overcame any risks as we had a very determined group, but we're going to get the job done one way or the other. That's my lot on there.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Hawke. Would you like to take us through the guidance and advice?
Yeah. We had wonderful support from SCVS, Swansea Council for Voluntary Services, with our lottery and other grant applications. The local authority also came good when we had a serious funding shortfall due to exceptional price increases in timber and other building products following COVID. I mean, there were really serious price increases at that time. We were fortunate to get an economic recovery grant of 130,000 for the authority, which solved this problem, and the new facility was completed in February 2023. Okay.
That's great, and it was good to hear that the council was able to help you in that circumstance. In terms of the main community benefits,
right.
What have you found since then?
Here we go. Lots of them. We have had over 1.3 million invested in our park over the past 2 years, most of which would not have happened without the transfer. We are currently looking at a further investment of around 1 million to complete our current plans over the coming few years and prove that our park is an exemplar in the city and county of Swansea, which is it's heading that way. We have had a very, very busy park with the following achievements. A new community pavilion, open daily and run by around 30 wonderful volunteers. The cafe provides a warm welcome and food drink at very reasonable prices. It generates an income of about 10,000 per annum, which is put back into the park facilities. The pavilion operates a dementia club, menopause support group, photography club, meeting room space, bowls facility, changing room for tennis, bowls, running, a place for birthday parties, baby showers, funeral wakes, afternoon teas for senior citizens, preparing community Christmas meals, flower arranging classes, and others, growing all the time. The football fraternity is growing from strength to strength with over 600 members, and girls' football membership has gone from 6 to 160 in a year. It is great to see all the youngsters enjoying the park. The new refurbished play area is a big plus for the children and attracts yet more people to the park and Pavilion Cafe. The tennis courts have been recently refurbished and no doubt will get significant use as Wimbledon starts shortly. The Canal Society operates its kayaks on the canal on a Sunday and is very popular, and the Heritage Centre opens for 3 hours on a Saturday and Sunday and provides a lot of information on the history and heritage of the area. Overall, a far more cohesive community with reduced isolation and significantly increased well-being. Okay.
Thank you. That's a great list of impacts there. So in terms of the disadvantages and challenges you found since the transfer, what have you got for us there?
Because we've been successful, parking has become a significant issue which we are addressing in the next phase of our development plan. Frustration with local authority departments not taking their responsibilities seriously, e.g. we've got a raised path leading to the pavilion. There's some roots growing up through it. And we ring up the parks and they say it's not their responsibility. It's responsibility and it's highways responsibility. So we ring highways and nothing gets done. Sometimes don't seem to care, but we do, as it is a trip hazard for our park users. Post-lease issues. We've got a collapsed drain, which is causing flooding in front of the new girls' pavilion, which we've just invested 435,000 in. The local authority are very slow to respond and have promised a camera inspection. We've been told it is our responsibility, which we don't accept, as it was a pre-existing condition before we signed the lease. We have a similar situation with the sewerage because there's a pumped sewerage system on site that should be automatic, but has to be manually done on a daily basis. And I'm afraid the LA is slow to react to this as well. Another challenge is utility bills. Very slow to come through. With the lease we signed in December 23, we should have been informed, in our opinion, who the existing suppliers were to the LA on signing the lease. Just this week, we had a bill of £3,000 for electric from December to the end of May from EDF. In hindsight, if we had been given the information, we could have negotiated better rates, but it's now too late because the bill has been sent. So we have not yet had a water bill, even though we've had that lease for 6 months. So on a handover and any future leases, it's our view that the utilities should be looked at by all parties. Whoever's taking over the lease or getting the lease should be told who the existing suppliers so that they could form a contract and negotiate better rates with them rather than many months later getting a bill out of the blue and not being able to do anything about it. That's that one.
I think you've raised some very important points there, Mr. Rooker, twofold really. In terms of the transfer of the property over to the group, we need to make sure that we have a clear list of duties of cares and suppliers, which I think you've mentioned there. And the other issue, which I think is related to what you mentioned earlier in that point, is about latent defects and having a clarity about who's responsible for any latent defect that becomes apparent after a transfer. So I think that's certainly something that we need to pick up and have a look at. So the next one is one of the ones that we found quite key in the investigations that we've had so far, is about consultation. Can you tell us about that?
The community was kept informed on what was happening through Facebook, website, Survey Monkey questionnaires, attendance at a village fete where we took a stand so that we could inform the community of what the proposals were. That was prior to COVID. We had several public meetings as we felt it was vital that they be kept informed, and ultimately supported us. It was not easy during the COVID-19 episode though, but we got there. We also had letters of support from all park organisations and other local organisations like the Over 50s Club, the Men's Shed, the local rugby club, and others.
Okay, thank you. And the last one, I think I preempted this question earlier when I said, what do you think could be improved in the process? And then I've got a couple of questions I'd like to add myself, and I'm sure some of the other members would like to probably ask you some direct questions. And as Mr. Daly joined us as well, Mr. Rook, he's also a member of your group.
He's the secretary of the Friends of Coed Gwynedd, so he might have something to say in a minute.
So I'll bring you in, Mr. Daly, as well in a minute. But if you can just, Mr. Rook, take us through, what do you think could be improved?
Right. Can it be improved? Yes. Single point of contact.
Yeah.
The contact, the deal with so that contact can deal with the internal workings of the local authority. So we just have one point and they can sort out the other things and come back to us. Dealing with different departments and different people can be very difficult. The legal side needs improving, far too slow. But I appreciate that you've got issues with staff problems and what have you. Giving details of all utilities in site and current suppliers would be very helpful, as well as taking readings on handover. Agreeing ongoing issues pre-existing, as we mentioned just now, at handover would also be helpful. Responsibilities of new group for fire extinguishers, pat testing, Legionnaire's disease in shower areas, which we have with pavilions, risk assessments, waste disposal, and fire risk assessments. All those we feel should be dealt with between the local authority as to what they have or haven't got, and what the new group needs to get. And perhaps going forward, a forum of park groups who meet once a year, maybe twice a year, to network would be a good idea, where all the park groups in Swansea, or a couple of members of each group, could sit down, network together, and discuss their issues. I'm sure a lot of which would be the same. That's basically what I've got.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rook. I think it certainly is the case that we need to look at duty of care and a way in which we can pass that over more clearly to groups. And the idea of a network is something that I think has popped up a couple of times in our inquiry so far, and it's something hopefully we can pursue. At this stage, Mr. Daly, would you like to come in and make any comments on behalf of the group as well?
I think David's covered most of the issues for us. I think one of the things that was quite beneficial for us was a kind of staggered approach to the takeover of responsibilities. So things like starting to cut the grass ourselves and things like that, and then working your way up, as Dave said, to some of the more complex things around getting showers checked for Legionnaires and stuff like that. It's not your everyday activity, and you can find a volunteer for grass cutting, but those other specialist tasks you've got to get somebody in to do. And I think knowing what those things are was a big thing. So the benefit of doing it in piecemeal fashion, I know it's more difficult for groups to then say, well, how far down the process am I? You know, rather than have a date and say on the 1st of April, this is all yours. It's quite straightforward, but it's much more difficult for volunteer groups to take those on in that kind of way. So it's a bit of a swings and roundabouts there. And I think David covered all the benefits of access to grant funding and things that we wouldn't be able to do without leases, and the support of council workers right across the board has been fantastic. So I think there's a lot still to learn. I think David's right. continuing to share that so that others can benefit from us being at the front of this is something we're very keen to do as well.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. One of the things that I wanted to ask both of you is about the capacity of your organisation, because you've applied for so many grants, you've taken on quite a lot of responsibilities. How have you found that, and what sort of individuals or how many of you are there to be able to do that? Because I think you must have reeled off at least 20 to 25 different grants that you've been successful in being able to get.
Well,
yeah, you go on, Tim.
If I cover the easier bit first, so the sporting side of things, changes on our side were absolutely essential to be able to take advantage of this. We couldn't have done this without, so we merged some of the clubs together in the community, because we couldn't have done this if we were, local rivalry and all the rest of it kicks in, and it's very difficult to then agree how to do and manage and maintain some of this stuff. So actually, the facilities became the key driver for improving the clubs, and we couldn't have done that as individuals. And we've shared and talked to people like Go Underhill and the sports clubs there, and it's not always easy to share some, put aside some long-held rivalries and all the rest of it to make that stuff happen. That's probably the hardest thing, is to get your act together in order to be in a position to, as you rightly say, have that strength to be able to then take on a huge amount of responsibility, not just the maintenance and what have you, but then the time to get funds, talk to funders, and give that confidence to funders that you've got a track record, that you can deliver and that you can spend the money well, that you've got good governance. All of that kind of stuff is really important. That would be the biggest tip for us, for anyone, is having that your own side of the house sorted before you go and start to try and draw these things in.
I think there's some very good points there. Have the members got any questions that they'd like to ask Mr. Rook or Mr. Daly about? Alan?
Yes, well, in fact, you preempted the question I was going to ask about the funding. I've often cycled past the path, Mr. Rooker, in years gone by, and always admired the fact that it's so well kept and so well used. But you've raised a sort of a huge sum of money. I was just wondering how many sort of people were involved in that, and sort of what sort of time scale will we be talking about here from the initiative, the early phases to completion? Because to raise 1.3 million with so many grants must have taken some time, and of course a lot of your I suppose volunteers. I was just wondering sort of how many people were involved and what sort of time scale did it take?
The Friends of Coed Willem have 12 trustees representing all park organisations, and I guess about 6 of those trustees were very active in raising the funds, a lot of which was done through COVID. So we didn't have a lot else to do in COVID except sit on a computer and fill in application forms to try and get grants. So in some respects, that is your answer. It kept me busy, and I was delighted to be doing something to try and raise funds for a very worthy cause.
But to answer a bit on timescales,
2 years.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the grants from the point of application and taking some of those organisations like the Football Association of Wales with us on that journey, where one of their criteria would be to have a lease, and going through the process and getting them to trust that the lease was coming, sort of thing, was the hard part, I think, to be able to line up those kind of stakeholders in the process. And that's probably about 18 months all in, from applying for the grant to getting the work done, going through the process of having things signed off and invoiced and all the rest of it. So it's got a lengthy process that you have to have those kind of well-established organisations to be able to do it. And I think that kind of test for the right kind of organisation to be able to put your faith in with, we're well aware that the park, as you mentioned in Clinic, is a crown jewel in this community, and is a responsibility for people to look after and to communicate with people in the community around what's best use for it. So there's quite a lengthy task there. I think David's underplaying just how much time and effort is taken for people like himself to go through that process. It is very time consuming to do.
Yes, I think I can fully appreciate that. I've only ever filled in one application for a lottery grant, and that took me months. It was about 40 or 60 pages long in completion, and of course it has to go through various forms of scrutiny, and I have to say I was unsuccessful in my case, but I can appreciate the timescale, and you know, your helpers, your volunteers, well, they deserve all the credit they can get. Yeah, but thanks very much.
Thank you.
Just one thing to add, though, that people like David Turner and Jeff Baker, those kind of people, when we understand, appreciate how busy they are, but when we can manage to get some time with them and talk things through and have that kind of face-to-face, things go so much quicker rather than, you know, having to chase each other for contact and emails and stuff like that. So actually that was, you know, their expertise, you know, people like Jamie Rubridge, who's I think is in this session, those kind of having their expertise is invaluable to us. To know experienced officers and their advice and guidance has been absolutely, you know, we couldn't have done it without that kind of expertise. You know, it's definitely not a one-way street in this sort of stuff at all.
Okay, if I can bring in Councillor Susan Jones, you've got a question you'd like to ask two gentlemen, yeah?
Yes, please. And can I just say congratulations to you? It sounds a really tremendous project that you actually achieved. I just wondered about the ongoing maintenance and what assurances that will continue over the next maybe 10, 20 years.
Well, anything we do, we like the running of the pavilion generates, as I said earlier, about 10,000 towards the park. The bowling green is maintained by volunteers. The community garden is run by volunteers. We have a litter picking group, volunteers. There's one person employed in the community cafe, but there's 30 volunteers. We cut the grass ourselves, volunteers, both around the bowling green and all the football pitches. Tim organizes that through the football community, and the park is the, you know, it's hard to say in some ways, but I think it's better maintained than it was before. Because it's our park, we've got ownership, and we want it to be the best. And you know, there's people coming in there most days, weeding beds and things, all volunteers, and they love it. It's a real good community.
But there is an important piece in there, like you say, about cost. So you can get grant funding. For example, we had some of that grant funding that David talked about will buy the machinery in the first place, but that doesn't pay for repairs or ongoing servicing and all the rest of it. So a lot of people think that when you take on the lease, you get ownership of stuff, you don't have to pay for it anymore, then the costs can go down, and because you kind of, we own it sort of thing. But that's a hard reality for them, and a lot of the membership costs have had to go up, because what the council was paying for, like David said, you could cut the grass once or twice a month, but actually doing it more often means you've got to pay for it yourself and all the rest of it. So membership fees for those people in the clubs has had to go up, and it becomes quite a burden on them. But it means that we won't be able to afford any big sort of improvements in those facilities, because the kind of capital project and spend that the council would have had, well, or may have had in the past, but probably hasn't got at the moment, we won't have that. So everything is going to be grant funded in the future, because we don't have the mechanisms to make a big profit out of it. So that will definitely be a challenge, and it's definitely the thing that makes us worry in the long term, is how do we continue to invest in the facilities rather than just tread water, which, you know, we do appreciate. That's where the council was itself, you know, in terms of all the pressures on the purse. So it is our biggest concern, is how to continue to improve without having any great fundraising mechanisms within the club.
Thank you. I suppose the challenge as well is to keep the volunteers coming, because that is a challenge in itself.
Yeah, no, they are wonderful, really wonderful volunteers, and they love it. Yeah, we haven't had an issue. Yeah,
We've got a long way to continue, but you know, people pop their clogs, and
I know they do. Yeah, we don't get younger.
So thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. One of the questions I was going to ask you is that with that on the horizon, obviously getting grants, majority of which are capital related. Do you foresee then a problem with any revenue costs going forward, being able to ascertain or get them, or do you feel there's capacity in the memberships to be able to cover that?
There's current capacity in the membership to continue with sort of the revenue support as we are now, but obviously they've got cost of living pressures and all the rest of it, and people are you know, there's a squeeze on those finances for individuals, but whereas we would have relied on the past, the council would have cut the grass anyway, sort of thing. Now we definitely, that is our biggest risk as a club, is to maintain the size of the club and the members who can afford to pay, because Clydach has its areas of poverty and deprivation with its membership, so not all of them can afford to pay the same sort of rates that you would need to keep moving forward and maintaining things. As gets, you know, the price of petrol, servicing and everything on your machinery gets more expensive. So it is a difficulty for us, and I think that's part of the reason we've talked about things like the cafe and the tennis courts has got a chargeable thing. So we've started to think about whether those could come under the broader lease and have a bigger lease, because then you've got some income that can help you with maintaining those facilities going forward, so that you can use the fees and charges to be able to pay for keeping the whole park up. So it is a tough one, and it's one that we, you know, it exercises us regularly.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. I think obviously any form of hard income that you can have will help you with revenue costs that go forward. Has anybody got any other questions that they would like to ask David or Tim? Okay, thank you for coming along today and to giving such a good case for asset transfer in terms of what you've been able to achieve there. If we can now move on to Penland AFC, and I believe Jamie Hopkins, you're with us, Mr. Hopkins. I wondered if you would be able to tell us about what was gone well for you with your asset transfer.
Yeah, I'll say unfortunately my colleague was supposed to come, who was kind of mainly involved in it, but unfortunately had to pull out just before the start, so I've had to come in his place. We are quite at the start, you know, kind of our journey in terms of the lease. The lease was only signed back in kind of March. So as a football club now, as talked about a lot, we are in the process of kind of, you know, going for grants and things like that to kind of get the project kind of up and running. So it is kind of the very early stages for us at the moment as a club.
Okay. I mean, is there anything you found challenging in the process so far?
Yeah, obviously the whole kind of process, I think, as a football club, I suppose different to Clydach, who got a lot of people involved. It was just kind of us as a football club, so there was only kind of a couple of us kind of doing it from start to finish, so that was a challenge in terms of how many people were involved in the project. Obviously I think how long it took was quite difficult as well. So yeah, we had quite a few challenges along the way in terms of timing, and as kind of similar to talked about, certain departments kind of talk to each other and things like that. There was quite a lot of difficulty we found from that point of view.
Were you given any guidance or support, or was there anything else that you think could be improved there?
You know, we received, you know, a lot of support through the process from people like Jamie Rubridge and especially Gemma Bevan. Both of them were fantastic, but I think it was certain departments kind of speaking to each other. I think I understand, again, they're obviously extremely busy and things like that, but I think it could have run a lot smoother, like when we were first made the application. As I say, I think we were in the same asset transfer as kind of Clydach, but obviously then they obviously got their sign before Christmas. We didn't get ours through, until March, kind of no fault through our own. So I think that, so when you're looking at funding, then we, like obviously they had a 300,000 from the FAW because of how long which I say all through the process we talked about in terms of timings and applications that we were making, but because of how long it took, we actually missed out on funding this year because the FAW refused because our application was a bit late and they needed to look at certain things which we said, and we were assured it would be done by Christmas at the latest. So again, we've got to wait now till next year. So in terms of trying to get our facility up and running now, it's probably going to take a lot longer than we would have liked, because we're probably going to have to wait until next year before we can go in through big funding through the FAW. So when we've just started girls teams ourselves now, that's become a big problem for us, because in terms of like getting a facility where it's kind of fenced off and looked after by ourselves and maybe a bit more secure for especially young girls looking to play, that's something that is going to really hold us back now over the next year probably.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of community benefits, I can see with the setup from March, you haven't really had a chance to see what they would be medium to long term, but has there been anything immediate from the transfer?
So we've started like girls training sessions, but unfortunately now because of the site we're having to kind of go elsewhere now. So we're renting like Meadowview each week to kind of give them a bit of a safer environment to play. So we are looking, we've just started an over 40s team now come into the next season. But unfortunately it doesn't look like where we've taken over the lease and we were hoping to get kind of up and running that facility it's going to take a bit longer now because of the delays, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. In terms of sort of bringing the community with you and consultation, can you tell us a little bit more about what you engaged in to consult the local people?
So we met with like a lot of local schools around it. So, we talked to them about things like when we get the facility, like things like football matches, if they wanted to bring their, cup matches and things like that to play in our facility, like things like sports days. We spoke with the rugby club because obviously it's quite close. Yes, we tried to do a lot around the community to try and get everyone involved, because obviously our junior section is quite large, and obviously we're looking now to get more involved in the girls because there's not many girls teams around our area, so we're looking to implement that to give them an opportunity to play football as well. So yeah, those are the type of things that we did. But unlike unfortunately Cleric, we are growing now, and we have over the past month or two had a lot more kind of people come on to our committee, but what did start as quite a small pool of like 2 or 3 of us having to do all the work. So it was kind of very difficult when you are volunteers, and like myself and my colleague who both got families and things. So yeah, we're probably not as quick as other clubs, but it is growing now, and we are growing as a committee, and a lot more people kind of involved now through this project.
Thank you. That's great. In terms of, I know you mentioned delays within the system. Is there anything else that you think could be improved in the process?
Maybe for like local football teams, I don't know, maybe kind of having maybe more clear guidelines of possibly how long it will take, and the the amount of things, going through business plans and things like that. I think obviously a lot of football clubs come to us now when like we speak to them and they say, oh yeah, we've just started speaking to the council, and kind of we go through what, tell them kind of what's involved. And I don't think a lot of them kind of understand. I think they just kind of say, oh, we've got this pitch and we want to take it over. And I don't think they kind of understand the work that kind of goes into it from kind of start to finish. So I think a lot of clubs could maybe be talked to up front and, explained, exactly the kind of process, because I think it would make a few look at it and think, oh yeah, we're not quite sure because 1 or 2 of us are now going through it, and they think we may be bitten off more than we can chew kind of thing. So I think it could be maybe explained, through the process and how long it will take, and kind of how much effort does need to kind of get put into it to kind of achieve the end goal.
So in addition to that, Jamie, do you think it would be useful to pick up the point that sort of Mr. Rook made earlier about there being a network potentially of people?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there's
especially when it comes to clubs.
Yeah, I think a lot of clubs who who are just maybe clubs. I think obviously Cleric is a little bit more different because they are, obviously they've got the community and, you know, lots of other things there where they've taken over the whole area. But I know a lot of football clubs who are just football clubs going through it, and they'll have a lot more challenges maybe through funding and things like that. So yeah, I do think it's, you know, I know about 3 clubs now who are currently, I think, speaking to the council within the Swansea area. So yeah, there could maybe be a bit more of a network and kind of people to understand, you know, what it takes to get it sorted.
Yeah, I think that sounds like it could be quite a useful way forward, given what you've said, that people are coming to you already and asking you about the process. So
yeah,
if we can almost try to make it a formal links for people, that would be good. Has anybody got any other questions directly for Jamie that they would like to ask about his experience? Okay, well, thank you very much, Jamie, for taking the time out this afternoon to come and speak to us, because I think, again, you've confirmed some of the useful points that we can take forward as inquiry in terms of making people aware of the process, what's involved in it, and also the chance to be able to give either formal or informal networking with other clubs and how they can do. So that's great. Thank you. The next person that I would like to bring in is Mr. Winspear, who is here from Swansea Council for Voluntary Service. Now, I know your experience of this process will be slightly different from the people we've just spoken to, but it'd be good to hear about what sort of support you provided, or what things that you found on behalf of the organisations that you work with that you think have went well or could improve, or any other aspect you think is worth sort of bringing to our attention.
Sure, thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to be able to provide some feedback to you. I thought it would be a good idea right at the start, just in case there are any members of your committee aren't aware of exactly what SCVS's remit is, to just give a brief overview. We're the umbrella organisation for the third sector for the Swansea area, and we have sister organisations in all parts of Wales, forming as a whole part of third sector support Wales. So our job is to provide any and all support, free at the point of contact, for all organisations in the third sector. That's charities, both registered and unregistered, social enterprises, community groups. I think it's important to understand in the third sector just the range of organisations that there are that are in there, and the huge differences that there can be from organisations that are extremely well organised and supported. Like I know I've worked with David fairly recently, and it's an excellent example of a really thriving third sector organisations. Right through to, I've worked with groups whose constitution is written in copperplate that they needed defining, as it goes back to the 1850s, with a very small group of people involved. So I think that context is important to bear in mind with some of the comments that I'd have to say. We haven't supported a huge amount of organisations with community assets transfers, and in the last year or so, we've had an expansion in our capacity for development work. And so previously, our capacity was pretty much limited to dealing with inquiries that would come to us, and it would tend to come to us when things have gone wrong, rather than at the start. But in the last year or so, because we have more capacity in the department, we've been working a lot closer with the council and council officers. And we have a regular monthly meeting where I know Gemma Bevan's name's been mentioned a couple of times already, who's a really fantastic officer, who's been a very good source of information when anything has come up in this area for us to help support. In addition, I also sit in the economic regen team, which has been another point of contact. And I think what we have seen over the last year is that there is a greater, or starting to become a greater awareness of what we can do in these situations, bringing in our expertise and knowledge of third sector organisations, which perhaps could solve some of the problems that occur before they started. Obviously, I can't go into individual details because of confidentiality on each of the cases, but I know And certainly reading some of the written submissions you've had, some of the mentions in there of some of the problems that came up were ones that, had we been involved at an earlier stage, probably we could have picked up and identified earlier over some of the very specific third sector things that the chances are somebody who is used to working with either public sector or private sector organisations just simply wouldn't be aware of. So, and I think that the current situation is that there is a very good contact between the council officers, and I think it's growing. Although in this case with community asset transfer, I would say that perhaps one of the things that would help in this area to avoid duplication, speed up the process, and get better quality is having a more formalized way in which, when third sector organizations are approaching about a community asset transfer, that we're automatically just notified to be brought in to see if that they would like that support. One of the biggest reasons we always hear from organizations about why they didn't come to us earlier for support is that they didn't realize we were here and didn't realize what was available. So, and in these cases with community asset transfer, it is a very difficult thing for many organizations. I think you've already heard there from David and Jamie about that it is complex, it is a little bit bureaucratic. If you do a quick search, if you were a third sector organization just interested in community asset transfer, the first thing that Google will point you towards is the 2021 policy that the council has on community asset transfers, and it's a good document, but it's not the most accessible document for third sector, and so it's perhaps it can, for some groups, maybe that could be a little bit intimidating in the process of not wanting to engage, being worried about whether they have the skills and capacity to understand it. Whereas once you've had a chance to work with those groups, then very often they realize they do have the capacity to be able to deal with it. So I think it's important to realize in these cases that the third sector will only ever engage when it wants to engage. It's there on a voluntary basis and is built on people's goodwill, that the time and efforts that they're putting in. So I think that in terms of getting successes out of community asset transfers, trying to, as much as possible, encourage organizations to want to participate and to do what is possible. Obviously, you can't just completely remove the bureaucracy, and there is a level of complexity, but trying to encourage people and have a little bit more hand-holding through that process. And David's point about the single point of contact, I think, is an excellent one. And even as somebody who I've been in this post for a year now, and I've got a good idea now who in the council is working in which areas, but I'm paid to do this on a daily basis, and even I would not necessarily know definitely the person to go to in certain situations. So from an outside point of view, maybe that can be a little bit intimidating for some groups. So I did think that was it was an excellent recommendation that was done there. And the only other point that was raised with a group I supported initially, they had been hoping that the freehold would be transferred on a community asset transfer. I did find it a little disappointing that wasn't considered in the policy. I saw the reasoning put in there to ensure the continuation of services. But that's entirely possible through freehold transfers with either charges or covenants being put in place for freehold transfers. So, and one of the other issues that it does cause is leaseholds are a lot more complicated when it comes to the actual asset transfers. So it's taking another level of complexity and putting it onto the group in terms of just simply the comprehension of the liabilities that groups can have under leases is not always easy for a third sector organization to fully grasp what it means. And in most third sector organisations, you will have a group of trustees or committee members who are all equally responsible and liable for the actions of their organisation. So going through a lease process can be a little bit more intimidating. And I was just wondering whether it would that was something that could maybe just be reviewed on and again, be a little bit careful on the warning that was had before on policies, given the time that we're in. But there has been talk in recent times about leaseholds being removed going forwards. Now, what that will look like, who knows? But maybe this is a time to actually look at that again and see, is there a way that freehold transfers could be done just to make the process simpler and reduce down the legal costs compared to a leasehold. But overall, I think that there are the organisations that have seized this are in a really good position for delivering good community benefit, which in the end is, from my understanding, this is what's behind the community asset transfer scheme, is wanting to put assets into the hands of those who are closest to the asset so that they can maximize the benefit for them. And I believe that the way the council is going about it is going absolutely in the right direction. They've got some excellent officers who are, more than anything, they want to see these things succeed, and they really do try their best to support the groups through. Perhaps going forwards, then as more and more organisations and maybe more and more officers within the council are aware of what we can do to assist in this area, that we can get involved a little bit earlier with the process and be able to support those groups through to ultimately achieve what we all want, which is more community facilities being run at a really good standard for the benefit of everyone in Swansea.
Thank you, Simon. Just to pick up a few points, I'll start probably with the easier ones. I think it is a good point that you make, and others have made previously, about there being a single point of contact within the authority. And we'll look to try and pick that up as one of our ideas that we'll discuss for recommendations. It's good to hear that SCVS are in a position to help with advising and being involved earlier in the process. And I would like to see if the capacity does exist in SCVS for us to literally name check you in any procedure or any forward documentation that we would do with any organisation, because I think having that independent view and the sense of advice and structure you can give on things like duty of care and the process and consultation would all be very useful, I think. The more complicated one is the one that you raised towards the end of your comments, which is to do with leasehold. Mm-hmm. Now, I think the complexity of a reversion of property back to the council after breach of covenant, that's probably one of the reasons that leasehold going to freehold would be difficult. It's not to say that we can't consider freehold or look at freehold potentially in certain circumstances, but I think it's very much led by the circumstances. But I think the idea of going forward on leasehold is probably for a protection for both parties as much as it would be for anything else. Okay, has anybody got any points that they'd like to raise with Simon? I think it was really comprehensive, Simon, and really appreciate your input, and also the organisation's commitment to assist us and to assist the groups that would come forward. Does anybody want to raise any points? No. Alan.
Sorry, Chair. It's on this. Yes, it's the third time now I've heard that comment about a single point of contact. Would that be within the council? And if it is it a staffing issue or is it a department that is not yet fully developed? It's just the fact that I've heard it a couple of times. I'm just wondering what the situation is there with that. Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Alan. I think the main problem, not to speak to officers, it will be that there are different areas of particular interest, be it culture or be it property. But I can see that Mr. McNulty will be able to help us with it.
Yeah, yeah. From our point of view, we can nominate a single point of contact from within our service. For those who don't know, I'm head up the cultural services team. Jamie and Gemma are within my service area. I think the single point of contact implies a dedicated service in itself, and by that I mean a single point of contact that could represent legal services, could represent property services, could represent current use, because I think if a few of the nuances that have come out from today that maybe haven't been touched on is that the council isn't the driver for asset transfer. The council doesn't seek to, periodically go out into the community and find people to take on playing fields or parks or any other community assets. But back in 2014, 2015, when there was, austerity first hit us hard, there was a priority within a recovery plan for community action. And that was very much about mainly people in my service area working with community groups to help regulate, to help protect, to help develop the assets of value to the community. Hence the, a large number of friends groups and how we establish committees and yellow licenses to govern and manage community centres. The drivers for the sports facilities have tended to be availability of grants which have come from national organisations. So, for example, Football Foundation, Association of Wales, they'll periodically announce grants, as will Sport Wales, with quite short turnarounds, and that tends to be the driver for leagues, local football clubs, more quite contained single organisations who are then under the pressure that we've heard described today to coordinate and consolidate. So there isn't a single point of contact within the council that can lead it end to end, because there isn't a council service as such to facilitate the transfer of council assets to community organisations. It is a responsive act, really. It is something that, we listen to the groups and the clubs, we'll weigh up the benefits. Due diligence is incredibly important for us to understand equality, access, that, the groups that are expressing the interest in these facilities and assets, which are owned by the public and simply curated and, sort of looked after by the council for future generations, that these facilities remain open and accessible to the wider community. That does take a lot of time. There's different factions. We need to get one bit right before asking legal to draw up the paperwork. The paperwork needs to be right before we can get the council decision to enter into the agreement. So it's unfortunate, but we've heard perhaps experiences where there have been delays caused by staff shortages, but it also depends on what else is going on at the council at specific times. There is a finite resource in the council. There could be some significant projects. These examples we've heard today, as I said, all tend to come in around about the same time because national bodies make announcements about funding being available. We try and do our best for the future of the community. And I think what we can take on board as we move forward within the Police Directorate, at least, is to make sure that as we recruit to staff, as they're leaving posts, and, we will be losing Jamie Rubridge at the end of this week. We because he's got a good job, not a better job. It couldn't be better. But he's managed to do very well for himself professionally. what we can do is make sure that these relationships and the need to be engaged in these relationships does feature in people's job descriptions going forward, and that people like Gemma are able and supported to be able to prioritise relationship building and hand-holding and signing off to the Paths Department. But at this stage, unless we were committed as an authority to prioritise the transfer of assets, I'm not sure we could create a service officer dedicated to it, and I'm not sure where they would sit.
Okay, thank you, Tracy,
Yeah,
for
thank
that.
yeah, thank you. I was just thinking in terms of as a the person, the contact would be a facilitator rather than somebody who could actually address the whole issue of a transfer. That's what my thought. Yeah.
I think we can do that with making sure that within the team we retain roles such as Gemma's, and we retain that professional expertise is so important that whilst the introductions are being made and that legal team feel confident in the information that they have, and that our corporate property team are confident about future use and making sure that people stick to what they say they're going to be aiming to do, that that's informed by somebody who understands how a football club and how sports pitches can be booked and maintained and be accessible to all the community. That's our priority, to keep these assets for all the community.
Thank you. If I can bring Jeff Bacon in now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't actually going to speak in this meeting because I was just going to wait for the findings of the of this committee and this panel, because I think that probably would be the best way to do it. But I just wanted to thank the contributors who've made some very kind comments about officers who've been trying to support. I think that's welcome, and I wanted to just sort of recognise that. On some specific points, though, this issue about a single point of contact is important, and it's one I think I talked about resource when I did my original report at the very outset of this. If you look at other authorities, they have large dedicated teams specifically to community asset transfer. Some maybe half a dozen officers who are dealing with these sorts of issues, and we don't. So we're dealing with it within existing resource. We've lost Lewis, who was my dedicated property officer, but he would only be dealing with it in theory from a property perspective, but quite often he was being involved in trying to act as that single point of contact across the organisation, but every part of the organisation is struggling with resource, and that's a common theme, as you know. One other quick point from the property perspective about freehold as opposed to leasehold. The fundamental rationale behind a leasehold disposal is to ensure that the body who is inheriting the asset from the council is at the very least inheriting it for the purposes they originally indicated. So we can control that with a lease. It's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to control that if you just have a freehold sale. You can have restrictive covenants, but they are very difficult to enforce, notoriously difficult to enforce. What you can do, though, which was what the intention of the original guidance was to create a leasehold transfer that should be straightforward and simple. A virtual freehold, if you like, because it's effectively a freehold. As you sell an asset and there is no restrictions. You could do the same with a leasehold to a large extent, but you control the use in particular, or any other community requirements that Tracy actually referred to. We're holding it for the benefit of the community. So if you keep those leases as simple as possible, the leasehold transactions should be really, really simple. What tends to happen is that organisations will be concerned about their rights and responsibilities, rightly so. And as a result, you have a debate around, well, I can't do that. I'm not going to deal with that fence or that tree or those boundaries or that roof or that wall or that party wall or whatever it is. That's where it gets complex. You wouldn't have those debates if it was a straightforward freehold disposal, because that would be undeniably the responsibility of the organisation you've taken on the freehold. So that's where it gets complex, and that's a very, very common theme. It's the fact that once you get to that, the negotiations around a lease, then that becomes the due diligence, part of the transaction. And understandably, organisations get worried about the fact that they have to take on this level of responsibility. We will pass on as much information as we have, but quite often, because of the fact that these are assets that have ceased to be maintained as they should be, that information can be sparse, and there could be problems. So that is a common theme. But I agree entirely with what a lot of people are saying in terms of dedicated resource, more resource. That would make the whole process that much easier. But we are amending with the diminishing resources we have. But as I say, Chair, more than happy to wait for the outcome of the panel's findings, and we can go into a bit more detail after that. But I wanted to just first of all acknowledge the kind words from your participants. And I also wanted to come in and say I have to leave in 5 minutes. Apologies. So I wanted to say something before I disappear. But Dave's here, so we can. I'll pick up with Dave after the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Tracy. Has anybody got any other points for Mr. Winspear for Simon? I certainly thank you, Simon, for coming along and for giving quite a comprehensive guide through the things that you think would be able to help asset transfer. And would be very interested in speaking to SCVS going forward when we make our recommendations about the level of support or mentoring that you would be able to provide for groups. Good. Okay, thank you. If we go on to the next few groups that have provided evidence, or we asked to provide evidence, the next one on our list was Swansea Tennis Centre, which transferred using the wellbeing powers rather than a CAT, but has been a very long-standing, successful project from my understanding. So we're hoping to get some feedback and some input from them still, and we'll continue to pursue that. You've probably seen, members, the submission that Mr. Pobleski has given us in terms of Underhill Park and the successful transfer that's happened there and some of the learning points. There's quite a lot of detail in there, and I would recommend that we read that again and have a look at that as helping us form some of our recommendations going forward. And we also, at the last meeting, received a written submission from Clanridian Higher Community Council. And again, they mirror many of the points that we've already heard from other people today about the process and delay, but also the fact that they feel they were assisted as well. So I'd like to sort of maybe bring that back into when we bring in the recommendations, because there's some common themes running through all of those. Has anybody got any points or things that they would like to raise about those three that we haven't had a chance to speak about? No? Okay. I just wanted to say thank you again to everybody that's come forward today, and especially those members of the public who've joined us and from SCVS as well to help us with the inquiry, because I think the points you made are very valid and very interesting in terms of forming recommendations, and thank you for taking your time for that. The next thing that we have on our agenda is to look at our project plan for the inquiry, and that's on page 13. And you'll see that the next session is session 5, and we're starting to draw things together here now in terms of one, looking at the legal aspects of community asset transfer, and one of the things that was raised by Mr. Winspear earlier, we can have a look at that in terms of the advice we also had from Mr. Bacon earlier. And we're going to start to draw together a findings report. So hopefully some of those common themes that we've spoken about today can make way into that. And that meeting is on the 23rd of July at the same time in the same place at 4:30. So I don't believe there is anything else that we need to raise today, unless Chris, you have a point you'd like to raise.
Yeah, I think one of these discussions we need to have a closed meeting for members only, because a lot of what is said, I think we need to have a discussion about amongst the members, because there are issues that are being brought up, which I think we need to discuss as elected members.
Thanks, Councillor. I totally agree with you. We got a meeting scheduled as meeting 6, which is the one after the next one, which will be closed and just for panel members only.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Okay, if I can draw the meeting to a close and thank everyone for their attendance, especially those who've joined us from outside of the council today. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.